The war hadn't ended. Not for me. That forest was my front line, and I was still a soldier. From the memoirs of Hiroo Onoda, Japan surrendered in 1945. Onoda never received that news, or couldn't accept it, and he kept fighting in the jungles of the Philippines for 29 years. December 1944, Lubang Island, the Philippines. It was a small island, small enough to get lost in the Pacific Ocean and never be found. But it mattered strategically. It was an important supply point for Japanese forces, and the Americans wanted it. Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda arrived on that island in December 1944. He was 26 years old, a graduate of the Nakano Intelligence School, and that was not an ordinary military academy. What they taught there was guerrilla warfare, surviving behind enemy lines, continuing to fight even when supplies were cut off, never surrendering under any circumstances. The order Onoda had been given was clear: defend Lubang. Whatever happens. His commander's voice was still in his ears. You will continue fighting until you die or until you receive new orders. Onoda took that order at its word, every single word. The Americans landed on the island in February 1945. Japanese forces were largely neutralized, but Onoda and his small group pulled back into the jungle, into the mountains, into the dense undergrowth where nobody could follow, and they began to wait. Reinforcements would come. New orders would come. The war was still going.
Hiroo Onoda's story stands as one of the most extraordinary individual accounts to come out of the Second World War. After Japan's surrender, Onoda continued to operate on Lubang Island for 29 years. During that time, he carried out numerous attacks against Filipino civilians and police. The Nakano School's training philosophy made surrender absolutely forbidden, not just as a rule, but as a deeply internalized conviction. That conditioning shaped every decision Onoda made over the decades that followed.
August 1945. Onoda found a leaflet in the jungle. It said, "The war is over. Japan has surrendered. All Japanese soldiers must lay down their arms and turn themselves in." Onoda read it. He thought about it, and he made a decision. This was a trap. Enemy propaganda. The Americans dropped leaflets like this to convince Japanese soldiers to give themselves up. Onoda had seen this in training. The enemy tried everything. This was just another method. Onoda put the leaflet down and walked back into the jungle. The truth of Japan's surrender had, in that moment, actually reached him. But Onoda hadn't believed it. He had 3 soldiers with him: Corporal Shoichi Shimada, Private Yuichi Akatsu, and Private Kinshichi Kozuka. The 4 of them began building a life in the jungle. They ate bananas and coconuts. They drank rainwater. They hunted, and they kept waiting. From that period, Onoda wrote this in his diary. "Every day in the jungle I learned something new. Every day I grew a little stronger. Reinforcements would come. All we had to do was wait." That wait would last 29 years.
After 1945, a number of Japanese soldiers in various parts of Japan's former occupied territories refused to accept the surrender. They came to be known as Zanryu Haishi, literally, soldiers who remained. Onoda held out longer than any of them. The Philippine government and the Japanese government made repeated attempts over the years to locate him and convince him to come in, through family members, former commanding officers, and leaflets dropped from aircraft. None of it worked.
4 years had passed. Private Akatsu left the group, quietly. One morning, he simply wasn't there. Onoda didn't go looking for him, because he already knew the answer. Akatsu had given himself up. For Onoda, this wasn't betrayal. It was weakness. Any person could be weak, but Onoda was not going to be weak. The group was down to 3. In 1952, the Japanese government dropped leaflets from aircraft. These leaflets contained letters from Onoda's family. His mother had written. His brother had written. "The war is over," they said. "Come home." Onoda picked up the letters. He held them for a long time. He recognized his mother's handwriting. It was real. But he still couldn't believe it, because the enemy could copy anything. They could produce fake letters. This could be another trap. He put the letters down. He walked back into the jungle. That decision was the turning point of Onoda's life, because from that moment on, A corner of his mind held doubt, but he pushed the doubt down because doubt was dangerous. Doubt made a person weak, and a weak soldier died. Onoda buried the doubt, buried it deep, and kept fighting.
Onoda's refusal to surrender was not simply a personal choice. The Nakano School's training philosophy psychologically conditioned soldiers in a way that made surrender feel genuinely impossible, not just forbidden, but unthinkable. This approach had become widespread in the Japanese military toward the end of the Second World War. The training Onoda had received made him extraordinarily resistant to outside information. It was precisely this conditioning that led him to interpret every surrender message, including letters from his own family, as enemy propaganda.
The 1950s, the 1960s, the years kept moving. Onoda and his two remaining companions had turned survival in the jungle into a system. They took food from farmers' fields, sometimes by force. Filipino villagers and police continued searching for them. Clashes happened from time to time. In 1954, Corporal Shimada was killed in a skirmish on the beach. Onoda was right there. When Shimada went down, Onoda tried to carry him, but it wasn't possible. He had to pull back. That night, he sat alone in the jungle. He thought about Shimada. They had spent 4 years together, eaten the same fruit, been soaked by the same rain, sat around the same fires. But he didn't cry, because crying was a luxury. Crying drained a person, and a drained soldier lost his focus. Now there were only two of them, Onoda and Kazuka. The pair kept living in the jungle together. The years blurred into each other. The seasons changed. The island changed. But Onoda didn't change. Every morning he woke up and did the same things. Cleaned his rifle, checked the perimeter, and waited. Years later, he told a journalist, "In the jungle, you don't notice time passing. Every day is the same as the one before. That either kills you or makes you stronger."
During the years Onoda spent on Lubang Island, Philippine authorities and the Japanese government launched dozens of operations trying to locate and persuade him. In 1959, Onoda was officially declared dead, but ongoing clashes with Filipino villagers kept alive the suspicion that someone was still out there. It is estimated that Onoda's group killed or wounded at least 30 Filipinos over this period, though that figure remains historically contested and continues to be debated.
October 1972, Kazuka was killed in a skirmish with Filipino police. Onoda managed to get away, but Kazuka didn't make it back. 28 years. The only man who had been by his side for 28 years was gone. Onoda was alone in the jungle. That night, he didn't light a fire. He didn't make a sound. He just sat down and stared into the dark. He thought about Kazuka. He thought about Shimada. He thought about Akatsu. All three of them were gone now. Some had died. One had given himself up. Only Onoda was left, and he was still fighting. But for the first time, he felt something. Something he couldn't quite put into words. Was it exhaustion? Was it loneliness? Maybe both at once. That night he wrote this in his diary. "Kazuka is gone. I am alone now. But the mission goes on. The mission always goes on." Nobody knows whether his hand was shaking when he wrote that. But the sentence itself says a great deal. It's the sentence of a man trying to convince himself. A man hiding his loneliness behind the idea of duty. Onoda kept living alone in the jungle. He hunted. He survived. He waited. But the waiting felt different now, heavier, quieter, because there was no one left to share the silence with.
Kazuka's death brought Onoda's existence back to the world's attention. Reports from the Filipino police and Japanese military equipment found on the body confirmed that someone was still out there. This triggered an intensive search effort in Japan. A journalist and adventurer named Norio Suzuki traveled to the island specifically to find Onoda. In 1974, he did, but Onoda still refused to surrender. Without an official order from a commanding officer, he would not put down his weapon.
February 1974. Norio Suzuki found Onoda in the jungle. Suzuki was a young Japanese traveler who had treated finding Onoda as an adventure, and he found him. In the jungle, rifle in hand, uniform still on, 52 years old. The two of them talked for a long time. Suzuki told Onoda the war was over, that Japan had surrendered, that nearly 30 years had passed. Onoda listened and refused. "I will not lay down my weapon without an order from my commanding officer," he said. "That is my duty." Suzuki went back to Japan, and then he did something remarkable. He tracked down Onoda's former commander, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. Taniguchi was running a bookshop now. The war had been over for a long time, and he had simply been living his life. In March 1974, Taniguchi traveled to Lubang Island. Onoda was waiting in the jungle. When he saw Taniguchi, he snapped to attention. Like a soldier, 30 years had passed, but his posture hadn't changed at all. Taniguchi gave the order officially. "The war is over. Your mission has ended. Lay down your weapon." Onoda placed his rifle on the ground, and about that moment he later said, "Something emptied out inside me all at once. I didn't know what to do with myself. The order I had been waiting 30 years for had finally come, but it wasn't what I had been waiting for."
Onoda's surrender made headlines around the world. The Philippine government initially wanted to prosecute him for the harm caused to Filipinos over the decades, but Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos issued a pardon. When Onoda returned to Japan, he was received as a kind of hero, but Onoda himself didn't see it that way. He said afterward, "What made me a hero? I followed my orders, and then I came home." That one sentence reframed the entire story.
When Hiroo Onoda returned to Japan, everything had changed. The cities were different. The people were different. Japan itself was different. When Onoda had left, he knew the Japan of the war years. When he came back, he found a country that had lived through an economic miracle, modernized, and opened itself to the West. 30 years. He had spent 30 years inside a jungle, and the world had moved on without waiting for him. Onoda couldn't find his footing in this new Japan. After a while, he left for Brazil. He set up a farm there, raised cattle, lived close to the forest. Maybe he couldn't do without forests anymore. Maybe the noise of the city felt foreign to him in a way he couldn't quite shake. Years later, he came back to Japan. He ran nature camps for young people. He taught survival skills. Perhaps that was the only thing he knew how to teach. How to survive. He passed away in 2014. He was 91 years old. Before he died, he said this in an interview. "I don't believe I did anything wrong over those 30 years. I followed my orders. I did my duty. But when I look back now, I find myself asking, what exactly was the duty, and who was it really for?" That question was never answered. Lubang Island is still there. The jungle is still there. The caves where Onoda hid, the paths he walked, the places where he waited, all of it is still there. A man spent 30 years waiting in a jungle, not for a war, for an order, for a voice, for someone to tell him it was over. And when that voice finally came, the man put his rifle down. And he didn't cry, because soldiers don't cry. At least that's what they had taught him.
Hiroo Onoda's story continues to be examined in academic circles, in discussions of military ethics, obedience culture, and the long-term psychological effects of war on individuals. His experience is treated not just as one man's personal history, but as a concrete example of how unconditional obedience training can shape a person, and how permanent that shaping can be. Onoda published his memoirs under the title, "No Surrender, My 30-Year War." The book has been translated into more than 30 languages and remains in print.